Welcome to Reading Through Mark. We are in the Gospel of Mark, getting to know Jesus as we read through Mark's telling of his life, ministry, death, and resurrection. Here we are in Holy Week. Jesus is confronting, or rather being confronted and answering his enemies, people that are trying to push back against what he has to say. We already saw the Pharisees and the Herodians, who normally would be enemies. They team up against Jesus. Now, today we're going to see some other people team up against Jesus. This time the Pharisees and the Sadducees, both of them hating Jesus more. So let's go ahead and jump into this. We're in Mark chapter 12, beginning at verse 18. Then the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him with a question. Teacher, they said, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but no children, the man must marry the widow and have children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first one married and died without leaving any children. The second one married the widow, but he also died, leaving no children. It was the same with the third. In fact, none of the 7 left any children. Last of all, the woman died too. At the resurrection, whose wife will she be, since the 7 were married to her? Jesus replied, Are you not in error because you do not know the Scriptures or the power of God? When the dead rise, they will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven. Now about the dead rising, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the account of the bush, how God said to him, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. You are badly mistaken. So first, a couple things to understand. The Sadducees are an interesting group of people. I once saw a really fascinating comparison between our modern-day political parties and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. There are a lot of interesting parallels between the two groups. The Pharisees tend to be very similar to a lot of conservatives today, and the Sadducees tend to be or have some parallels with a lot of liberals today. It is very interesting to see. The Pharisees would have been more popular in the rural areas, whereas the Sadducees were more popular in the urban centers of the place. The Pharisees tended to be very conservative in their religious views. They believed in the resurrection and angels and demons and all these kinds of things, whereas the Sadducees tended to see those things as more spiritual. That there are no angels. They reject a lot of these spiritual ideas, and they also, as we're seeing here, they reject the resurrection. And so the reason they put forth this idea before Jesus, this ridiculous story, is because they want to make fun of the resurrection. They want to show the resurrection is absolutely silly. And so here again, we see the Sadducees and Pharisees, which normally would be at each other's throats because they don't like Jesus more. They're teaming up to try and tear Jesus down. So they give this example. And they're referencing a law in the Old Testament Mosaic law for the Israelites by which God saw to it that widows would be taken care of. Back in that day, it wasn't typical for a woman to be able to work and provide for herself. Typically, if she was going to be cared for, if she was going to thrive in society, she needed to be married and have a family. And so God set up this system in the Old Testament Israelite nation where if a man gets married and he dies without having any kids, that again would be able to live or continue on that family name and provide for that mother as she gets older, then that man's brother would marry his widow and then have children for her. And so this was a way to take care of widows, and also a way to take care of people's family names. And they cared a lot about this. People wanted to have descendants, wanted to have their name continue on. They didn't want to be forgotten by future generations because they didn't have kids. And so because this was such a big deal for them, they had this law put together. So in this ridiculous situation, there are these people who, or there's this woman who marries 7 brothers. None of them leave her children. And so the ridiculous idea is, well, she's going to be married to at the resurrection. And so Jesus responds again with this fascinating way. One other aspect of the Sadducees is that they rejected most of the Old Testament. They only saw the first 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They saw only those first 5 books of the Old Testament scriptures as being from God, as being valuable. And so Jesus responds to them by going to those very books, gives the account of the burning bush in the Exodus, and shows, hey, God is the God of the living, right? He's not the God of the dead. And so therefore, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they must be alive. therefore God must bring about resurrection. And so Jesus again gives this fascinating picture there to show them that they don't know their own religion as well as they think they do. And this is again maybe some good wisdom for ourselves, right? As you talk with other people who have different beliefs than you, it's valuable for us to understand where somebody else is coming from and ask them questions based on their own worldview and show them where their own beliefs maybe don't fit together so well, right? That can be a valuable way to deal with people that disagree with you on various things. Ask them questions, get to know them, and speak to them on their terms. This is what Jesus does, and he does it very well. Good example for us. Continuing on, at verse 28, one of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, "Of all the commandments, which is the most important?" "The most important one," answered Jesus, "is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this: Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." "Well said, teacher," the man replied. "You are right in saying that God is one and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart and with all your understanding and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices." When Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And from then on, no one dared ask him any more questions. Here again is another interesting concept where Jesus is sort of giving us a prioritization of morality. And there is some value to this, to understand which laws are more binding, are more important for us to pursue. Now, that's not to say that we should just ignore other aspects of morality because certain ones are more important, but it does help us to prioritize those things. Another example we've seen in the Gospels of Jesus is that Jesus asks, again, for the Old Testament Israelites, they were supposed to rest on the Sabbath day, and then Jesus asked them, well, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day, right? If I help my neighbor, but I work to do that, have I broken the Sabbath day? Comparatively, if I hurt or harm my neighbor on the Sabbath day, right? Which is better? And so he's giving us the point, it's good to help my neighbor, right? Even if it's on the Sabbath day. Here in this case, right, they see that it is most important to love God with all my heart, soul, strength, and mind, and to love my neighbor as myself, and that those things are much more important than all the sacrifices of the Old Testament ritual system. And so again, it gives us this idea, and we should take this to heart too as Christians, right? There are certain matters of the law that are weightier, right? So again, if I'm faithfully going to church every single Sunday, but I'm a complete jerk to everybody I meet all the time, right? I have neglected those weightier matters of the law. Now, again, that's not to say we should not go to church, but it is to say that there are certain aspects of the law that are more important. So am I loving God with all my heart, soul, strength, and mind in my daily life? And am I loving my neighbor as myself? Those things are far more important than the rest of Christian morality. Not to throw out the rest of Christian morality, but those are the most important things. And as we gauge ourselves on those things, we're going to find, yeah, we've fallen short. We haven't done those things properly, but Jesus absolutely has. So let's continue on. So all these people have tried to push back on Jesus. Now Jesus is going to throw a question back at them to silence everybody for good here in verse 35. While Jesus was teaching in the temple courts, he asked, "How is it that the teachers of the law say that the Christ is the son of David? David himself, speaking by the Holy Spirit, declared, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet.' David himself calls him Lord. How then can he be his son?" The large crowd listened to him with delight. As he taught, Jesus said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. Such men will be punished most severely." Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a fraction of a penny. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "I tell you the truth, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty put in everything, all she had to live on." So again, fascinating section here, Jesus is seeing these people pushing back on him. Well, Jesus is now turning at the tables here, and he is pushing back on them. So he makes it clear, first off, that the religious leaders at that time really had no clue what they were talking about, right? He gives us this example of David was, again, one of the great kings of Israel, and the prophecies had said that the Messiah would be David's son. And yet Jesus points out, well, hold on. How can the Messiah be David's son if David calls him his Lord? And so Jesus is getting at the reality that Jesus is both God and man. He is the eternal God, and therefore he is above and more authoritative and the Lord of David, and yet he is also human and therefore a descendant of David. And so Jesus is pointing this out using the scriptures and silencing all his opponents, making it clear that they have no clue what they're talking about. They can't answer this simple question. And then Jesus just goes after those enemies of his, those people that want or eventually are going to put Jesus to death. And he's making it clear that this whole religious system at the temple in Jerusalem in the 1st century AD there has become so thoroughly corrupt. And he points out the religious leaders who, rather than pursuing the things of God, are simply after man's praise. And so they put on this show of religion, but they are inwardly corrupt. They are hurting people. The scriptures make it very clear that we ought to help the poor and weak in society, and yet here Jesus says they devour widows' houses, right? A widow in that time, again, would have been poor, would have been impoverished, and yet here they are devouring. Rather than helping out somebody in need, they are devouring this person's household. And then we get an example of that exact thing with the widow's mite, the widow's offering, right? There's this poor widow. She's got nothing to live on but these 2 itty-bitty coins worth like a fraction of a penny, right? And she, again, likely because she's been taught that she has to give all her money to God, right? Even though nobody else is doing that. This poor little widow is putting in everything she has to live on. Here again, the corrupt system is devouring this poor widow's livelihood entirely rather than taking care of her. And so Jesus is seeing all of this, and he is infuriated. And as we're going to see next time in chapter 13, Jesus then predicts the destruction of Jerusalem. This entire thing is going to be torn down because it has become so corrupt. That is all for now. God's richest blessings on you until we meet again.
And I say, can't be that easy. And he said, and no, it wasn't easy, but be still.